Her daughter-in-law left her on the ER floor, unanswered calls, ignored pleas. Charlene Dobbs, a retired nurse and grandmother, didn't beg. Brie, her daughter-in-law, didn't even blink. By the time the night ended, she would have Brie served in the very place she had once left her behind. She'd spent years as a mother-in-law, now she was her own defender. And when Brie thought she could avoid the consequences, the court would make sure the truth came to light. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Charlene Dobbs pressed her cheek against the cool tile, sweat soaking the collar of her flannel. Her pulse drummed too fast, too light, like the wings of a moth trapped inside a jar. The faint chemical smell of the cleaning spray she'd used that morning clung to the floor, but all she could think about was the heavy, hollow ache in her chest, and the way her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She tried pushing herself up, but her legs buckled. The world tilted, colors draining from the edges. She knew the signs. Her blood sugar was plummeting, and she wasn't going to steady it on her own. With fumbling fingers, she snatched the phone from her robe pocket and tapped Brie's name. It rang. Once. Twice. Then voicemail. Brie, it's me. I don't feel right. Please. I need you. Her voice cracked. She listened for the tone, but the call cut to silence. She tried again. This time Brandon. The call went straight to voicemail. Her son didn't even let it ring. Her breath quickened. Every second mattered now. She clawed at the counter, pulling herself upright long enough to stagger toward the kitchen. The light from the refrigerator was blinding when she yanked it open. Rows of carefully labeled containers and a lonely bottle of water stared back. She spotted the orange-capped vial of emergency insulin on the top shelf and reached. Her hands shook so violently, the vial rattled against the glass shelf. She sank into the nearest chair, panting, clutching the syringe like a lifeline. The kitchen clock ticked with cruel precision. Her phone buzzed in her lap. Just a notification from the local news. Not Brie, not Brandon. Her vision blurred as she typed a text with clumsy thumbs. Please come. I need to go to the hospital. She sent it to Brie and waited, phone balanced in her palm like a fragile promise. The silence stretched. She kept glancing at the glowing screen. No dots, no reply, only the slow drip of sweat sliding down her temple, soaking into the neckline of her shirt. She tried to steady her breathing. The insulin dulled the worst of the dizziness, but the weakness in her limbs stayed. Minutes crawled past. She checked her phone again. Nothing. Her throat tightened. She knew what came next. She didn't want to be that neighbor, the one calling 911 over and over because no one else answered. But tonight, there wasn't a choice. She pressed 3 numbers, her voice thin and shaking as she gave her address. The dispatcher's calm instructions felt like a rope tossed across a chasm. She clung to it. When the paramedics arrived, red lights flashing against the pale siding of her aging ranch home, the air outside was crisp with the faint scent of cut grass. They strapped her onto the gurney with professional efficiency, adjusting the oxygen, voices low but urgent. Blood sugar crash, one said, scanning her vitals. She's lucky she called. Lucky. That word rattled in her ears as the doors slammed shut behind her. A familiar voice broke through the hum of the ambulance engine. Don't you worry, sugar. I'm right here. Loretta Spivey, her neighbor of 20 years, had climbed in beside her, holding her hand as though Charlene's trembling could be absorbed by sheer will. Loretta's perfume, powder, and lavender wrapped around her like a blanket. They didn't answer, did they? Loretta asked quietly. Charlene closed her eyes, shame prickling hot against her skin. No. Loretta gave her hand a squeeze, firm and steady. Then we'll get you through this ourselves. The ambulance lurched forward, siren wailing into the Kentucky night. Street lamps streaked past in pale ribbons through the back windows, and Charlene tried to steady herself with each breath, but her mind kept circling the same empty screen, the silence of 2 phones unanswered. By the time they wheeled her into the ER, her body felt like a sack of sand, heavy and uncooperative. The air smelled of antiseptic and reheated coffee, machines beeped steadily, and the nurses spoke in quick, clipped tones. Someone slid an IV into her arm, cool liquid threading into her veins. When the chaos slowed, she reached again for her phone, her thumb trembling as she unlocked it. Finally, a message. Her eyes darted across the screen, desperate. The timestamp hit her like a slap, 3 hours too late. Brie's words were flat, unbothered. Hope you're better. We were out. Charlene's breath caught, her grip tightening on the phone as if she could crush the message out of existence. Her heart thudded against her ribs, not from the sugar crash, not from the IV drip, but from the sickening realization that her call for help had been ignored. And tomorrow, she knew, she would not forget. The fluorescent light above Charlene's bed buzzed faintly, its glow tinting everything a sterile blue-white. She traced the IV tubing with tired eyes, following the slow drip that kept her hydrated, each drop an audible reminder of how close she'd come to not waking up at all. The doctor's words still rang in her ears: dangerously low blood sugar, severe dehydration, another hour, and it might have been different. Different meant gone. She signed the chart with shaky hands, the pen nearly slipping between her fingers. I didn't imagine this, she murmured under her breath, eyes flicking to the envelope of hospital paperwork already waiting on her tray table. She knew what that envelope meant: numbers, bills, debt, proof carved in ink that she had been there, that her body had betrayed her, and that someone had let her calls ring out while she lay helpless on the bathroom floor. The door creaked, and Brandon stepped inside. His cologne reached her before his eyes did. Sharp, expensive, out of place in the antiseptic room. He held his phone in his hand, thumb still scrolling, even as he muttered, "Hey, Mom." Charlene managed a faint smile, but he didn't look up long enough to notice. "You came. Couldn't stay away too long," he said, glancing toward the clock as if it were more important than her pulse monitor. He sat on the edge of the chair, drummed his fingers against his jeans, answered one text, then another. He asked about her health, but the question was hollow, his tone already halfway to the next meeting, the next obligation. 9 minutes later he stood. "Brie sends her love. She's tied up today." Charlene's lips pressed into a thin line. Tied up. That was Brie's favorite phrase, perfectly vague, perfectly useless. When the silence stretched, Brandon cleared his throat. "Do you need anything else?" "Just a ride home," Charlene said, carefully, hopefully. He nodded, but his eyes had already returned to his phone. "I'll check with Brie." And just like that, he was gone. His footsteps fading down the linoleum hall. Charlene waited, staring at the open door long after it closed. Her phone buzzed minutes later. A text. Not from Brandon. From Brie: "We're busy. Maybe tomorrow?" Her chest tightened. Tomorrow wasn't a kindness. It was dismissal wrapped in casual words. She dropped the phone back onto the blanket, letting it slip from her hand. That night, Loretta appeared like a storm in slippers, her floral housecoat flapping open at the corners as she marched down the hall. "They're not leaving you here, sugar," she declared, waving at a nurse until someone fetched a wheelchair. "Not while I've got 2 good arms and a set of keys." The air outside smelled of damp asphalt and autumn leaves. When Loretta wheeled Charlene toward her aging sedan, the headlights carved thin beams through the fog, and for the first time since the collapse, Charlene allowed herself to exhale. The night was quiet, except for the hum of the tires and Loretta's steady muttering about young people these days thinking Instagram counts as responsibility. Back home, Charlene sat at her kitchen table with a notepad. The paper was rough beneath her pen as she began recording glucose levels, call attempts, timestamps, symptoms, every detail she could recall. If no one else would take her word for it, then she'd build her own record, a ledger of being ignored. The next morning, while sipping watered-down coffee, she heard the scrape of a chair in the room next to hers at the hospital. She'd returned for lab work, and Loretta, never one to waste opportunity, was already leaning toward a man in a navy blazer. He was tall, thin, hair cropped short, papers spilling from a worn leather briefcase. "Zach McCrae." He introduced himself in a dry, even tone, when Loretta all but dragged him over. Legal aid. I was here for another client, but your neighbor tells me you've had some issues. Charlene felt the warmth rise in her cheeks. She wasn't sure she was ready to voice it aloud, but Loretta's nod was all the permission she needed. Quietly, she explained the ignored calls, the late text, the ride never offered. Zach listened without interrupting, eyes sharp, tapping a pen against his legal pad as though each detail locked into place. When she finished, he closed the notebook with a snap. I'll need to review, he said, standing. But if what you've described is accurate, this isn't just neglect. This is actionable. That night, back in her recliner with the TV buzzing low, Charlene's phone rang. Not Brandon, not Brie. Zach's voice was clear, deliberate. Mrs. Dobbs, I believe we're looking at neglect, and I don't intend to let it slide. The hospital's discharge desk buzzed with the shuffle of papers and the faint antiseptic sting that never left the halls. Charlene sat in her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap, waiting for a ride that would never come. Nurses passed with clipboards and tired smiles, and every so often one would glance at her, as though expecting family to appear any minute, but no one did. The caseworker double-checked the file. Mrs. Dobbs, you listed your son and daughter-in-law as emergency contacts. Both were notified when you were admitted. Both declined to come. The words stung sharper than the IV needle. Declined. Not missed. Not couldn't. Declined. Charlene swallowed the lump in her throat and forced her voice steady. Thank you for confirming. Loretta appeared moments later, pushing through the double doors with her purse clutched under her arm like a weapon. Knew it, she muttered. Not a soul showed, did they? She wrapped a cardigan around Charlene's shoulders and leaned in close. Well, sugar, they may think you're invisible, but I see every bit of what they're pulling. The next sting came at the pharmacy counter. Charlene slid her discharge slip across the glass, and the technician frowned. Already picked up. Charlene blinked. By who? The woman checked the log. Signed for by Brie Dobbs. The edges of Charlene's vision trembled. Brie had her medication in hand, and hadn't brought so much as a single pill. The thought of it lodged deep. A betrayal so deliberate it soured her stomach. Loretta placed both hands on the counter, leaning forward. Pull the camera. Ma'am, I pull the camera. The footage played on a back monitor. Brie in oversized sunglasses, hair pulled into a sleek bun, scrolling her phone with one hand while signing the slip with the other. She didn't glance toward the shelves or ask about Charlene. She just tucked the bag under her arm and left. Charlene's breath came slow and shallow. The proof was there. Brie had stood where Charlene now stood, signed her name, and walked out without a backward glance. That evening, Zach sat across from Charlene at her kitchen table, papers spread like puzzle pieces. He adjusted his glasses, reading the pharmacy report and hospital contact log with the detached precision of someone who had seen this kind of thing too many times before. This isn't miscommunication, he said finally, sliding the pages back toward her. His tone carried weight, clipped and certain. This is deliberate non-response, and that makes it far more serious. Charlene stared at the documents, the ink blurring slightly. They wanted me to feel like I had no one. Zach leaned back, folding his arms. Then we make sure the record shows you weren't alone. We make sure the law sees it too. Loretta patted the table between them. Amen to that. The following morning, a uniformed figure knocked on Charlene's door. Officer Rena Kelly stood tall, notepad already in hand, her presence filling the doorway like a steel wall. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. Mrs. Dobbs, I've been briefed, she said. We'll begin with a wellness review. I'll need dates, times, call records, anything that can prove a pattern. Charlene nodded, already reaching for the folder she had begun to build. Pages filled with glucose readings, timestamps of unanswered calls, the text that arrived 3 hours too late. Each note was written in her careful script, neat enough to be courtroom ready. The officer flipped through the papers, lips pressed thin. This is thorough. Most people don't have this much prepared. You've been keeping track for a while. Charlene lifted her chin. When people don't believe you, You learn to keep receipts. That night, while the crickets hummed in the yard and Loretta brewed chamomile tea, Charlene wrote her full timeline. From the bathroom floor to the discharge desk, she chronicled every moment. Ink scratched across paper, like a drumbeat of resistance. It was nearly midnight when Loretta called. Her voice carried both triumph and anger. "Sugar, you won't believe this. Brie didn't just pick up your meds. She used your prescription discount card on her own antibiotics." Charlene froze, pen hovering above the page. A new chill crept down her spine. This wasn't neglect anymore. This was theft, plain and traceable. And it was only the beginning. The Walgreens clerk slid the transaction log across the counter. The paper crackled under Charlene's fingertips, the ink still faintly smelling of toner. Her eyes scanned the line item. Amoxicillin, 500 milligrams. Purchased Brie Dobbs. Discount applied. Charlene Dobbs Senior Savings Card. Her stomach clenched. She hadn't filled that prescription. She hadn't even left her bed. Zach sat beside her, jaw tight, eyes narrowed as he read the same line. "She used your card," he said flatly, his voice like the snap of a gavel. "Not just your pickup slip. Your medical discount, while you were strapped to an IV." Charlene pressed her lips together, steadying herself against the swell of heat rising in her chest. Betrayal didn't burn. It froze. Cold, heavy, unshakable. By that afternoon, the complaint was filed. Zach guided her through every line of the form, his pen moving with the ease of a man who had done this many times before. "Fraud. Financial exploitation. Elder abuse," he murmured, as he wrote. "They'll wish they'd left you ignored instead of leaving a paper trail." Officer Kelly arrived just after sunset. Her knock was brisk, purposeful, her presence carrying the quiet fury of someone who had seen this before. She opened her notebook, voice crisp. "Let's start with the card use. Walk me through what you found." Charlene laid the paper on the table. The officer studied it, eyes darkening, before writing quickly. "Pharmacy logs don't lie. We can subpoena the footage if necessary." The sound of her pen scratching across the page steadied Charlene more than anything else had in weeks. Someone official believed her now. The phone rang that night. The name on the screen almost made Charlene drop it. "Brandon," she answered, pressing it to her ear in silence. His voice came casual, almost annoyed. "Mom, Brie said you've been stirring up trouble. We thought you were exaggerating what happened. You know you can be dramatic when you're sick." Charlene's throat tightened. The words felt like salt on an open wound. She didn't argue, didn't cry. Instead, she held the phone out across the table. "Mr. Dobbs," Zach said, his voice low and cutting, "this is your mother's legal counsel. From now on, all communication runs through me." The line went silent, then a click. Loretta clapped once sharp. "That's how you handle a coward." But the storm wasn't finished. Later that night, Charlene's email pinged with a new message. Loretta's subject line read, "You need to see this." Charlene opened the attachment, her heart thudding. A PDF invoice loaded, the company logo gaudy against the screen. Lip serum, hydrating mask, luxury face cream. Total $239. Shipped to address, Charlene Dobbs, Lexington, Kentucky. Payment method, Charlene's discount card. Her jaw dropped. Brie wasn't just using her for prescriptions. She was funneling online beauty orders through Charlene's name. Packages she never saw, charges she never approved. The room felt smaller. The walls pressing in. "She's stripping me piece by piece," Charlene whispered. Zach adjusted his glasses, eyes hard. "No, she's building a trail. And I'll make sure it ends in court." The following morning, the mailbox offered one more blow. A thick envelope. Brandon's name in the return address. Charlene tore it open, her hands trembling. The letterhead was from his insurance company. Notice of dependent add-on. It listed her name, her birth date, and beneath it, a line she had never signed. Charlene Dobbs, initialed for enrollment. Her knees weakened. They hadn't just used her card. They'd used her identity. The letter slid from her hands to the floor. Her world tilted again, not from sugar or dehydration this time, but from the realization that her son had written her into a contract she'd never agreed to. And for the first time, she understood. Neglect was only the surface. Beneath it was theft, and beneath that a plan. The insurance folder lay open on Zach McCrae's desk, fluorescent light catching the edges of the pages. He tapped his pen once, then again, before turning the document toward Charlene. "Take a good look," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes gave him away, sharp, blazing with irritation. There, stamped neatly in black ink, was Charlene's name listed as a dependent under Brandon's employer-sponsored health plan, and scrawled beside it, half a signature, her initials, jagged and unfamiliar. Charlene's breath stuttered. She reached out, fingertips brushing the page as though contact alone might erase it. "That's not mine." "No," Zach agreed, voice tightening. "It isn't." For a long moment, the office was silent, but for the faint hum of the overhead light. Then Zach leaned forward, pen poised. "This isn't just fraud, Mrs. Dobbs. This is identity theft. They're using your name, your medical history to extract benefits they aren't entitled to. And you," he paused, letting the weight settle, "you could be held liable if we don't shut this down immediately." Charlene's pulse thumped in her ears. Her own son had written her into a policy without her consent, her health, her life, reduced to leverage for an insurance premium. She straightened her spine. "Then let's shut it down." By the end of the afternoon, Charlene sat at her kitchen table once again, this time with an identity fraud report in front of her. She signed each page with deliberate strokes, the pen biting into the paper. Zach faxed copies to the State Bureau, while Officer Kelly made calls, her clipped voice carrying across the kitchen. "Yes, this is an urgent flag. Employer fraud suspected. I need confirmation of dependent verification." Kelly hung up and met Charlene's eyes. "It's been submitted. His HR department will be notified." If he thought no one was watching, he was dead wrong. Outside, the early evening cicadas buzzed, their drone filling the silence that followed. Charlene pressed a hand to her chest. She wasn't just fighting neglect anymore, she was building a case brick by brick. But Brie was building her own story too. The next morning, Loretta returned from the grocery store shaking her head, lips pressed thin. "Ran into Linda from down the street," she announced. "Guess who told her you're getting paranoid, Charlene? Said you're slipping, making up stories that don't add up." Charlene froze, the sting immediate. "She's painting me as senile." Loretta slapped a hand on the counter. "And she's doing it because she knows you're telling the truth. That's her defense. Call you crazy before anyone listens." Instead of crumbling, Charlene reached for the folder Zach had left her. "Then we'll answer with facts." That afternoon, Loretta drove her to the notary's office downtown, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old paper. Together they signed and stamped a personal affidavit, Charlene's statement detailing every lie, every forgery, every act of dismissal. Loretta stood behind her, a steady hand on her shoulder, as the seal pressed into the document with a metallic snap. "You're not just protecting yourself," Loretta whispered. "You're setting a record no one can erase." Zach, true to his word, didn't waste a day. By evening, a draft of the cease and desist sat in Charlene's inbox. Each line cut sharp. Brandon and Brie were to immediately stop using her personal information, cease financial exploitation, and withdraw any fraudulent medical filing. Failure to comply would result in civil action. Charlene read it twice, her hands trembling, not from weakness this time, but from something closer to resolve. For once her words had been given legal teeth. She closed the laptop just as her phone buzzed. A text. Her heart lurched. "If you go through with this, don't expect help when the next episode hits. Brie." The words glowed on the screen, venom packed into casual phrasing, a threat hidden under the pretense of warning. Charlene's hand curled tight around the phone. Brie hadn't offered help before, but now she wanted to wield it like a weapon. And Charlene knew, with chilling clarity, this was no longer about family disagreements. It was war. The text still glowed on Charlene's phone when she set it face down on the counter, her hand trembling, Not with fear, but with fury. Brie had never once lifted her out of a crisis, but now she wanted to weaponize the word help. Charlene walked into her bedroom, slid open the closet, and pulled out her late husband's old aluminum cane. The rubber tip was worn, the handle scuffed, but it held steady under her weight. She tested it across the hardwood floor, the sharp tap-tap echoing like punctuation to her decision. She would not be beholden to Brie's fake concern. The next morning, a technician arrived to install her new medical alert system. No middleman, no family approvals. One button linked directly to EMS. The technician explained the features in a rehearsed voice, but Charlene barely listened. Her focus stayed on the red emergency button glowing faintly against the beige plastic. It was hers alone, and that mattered more than anything. "You don't need anyone's permission now," Loretta said, watching with arms crossed. "That button is the only company you can count on." Later that day, Charlene met with Zach in his office again. He slid a stack of documents across the desk, his dry wit barely concealing the satisfaction on his face. "You've been emancipated from your own family," he said. "Brandon and Brie are no longer your medical proxies. They can't make decisions for you. They can't authorize anything." Charlene exhaled, the weight lifting slowly. "They wanted to write my story for me. They don't even get a pen now." Meanwhile, Officer Kelly stopped by for coffee, her uniform crisp even off duty. She pulled a small notepad from her jacket. "I've added you to our priority welfare checklist. If dispatch gets a call, you're top of the roster. No waiting." Charlene stirred sugar into her coffee, listening to the spoon scrape against the mug. "Feels strange, having strangers care more about me than my own son." "Sometimes," Officer Kelly said evenly. "Strangers do a better job at family than blood." By week's end, Charlene and Loretta sat side by side at her kitchen table, ordering a new government-issued ID. Her old one had been tied to too many accounts Brie had meddled with. Loretta helped her select a tamper-proof medication lockbox, the catalog paper smelling faintly of ink and glue as they flipped through the pages. "You guard these pills tighter than Fort Knox," Loretta said. "She won't get near them again." Charlene managed a small laugh, but her hand still shook as she filled out the order form. That night, she opened a new spiral notebook and wrote the title across the top of the first page in deliberate block letters. Timeline of neglect. One by one she listed it all. Every ignored call. Every prescription slip signed by Brie. Every appointment canceled without her knowledge. Every time she'd been painted as paranoid or slipping. The ink bit into the page as if each letter was carving her resolve deeper. When Zach returned 2 days later, Charlene handed him the notebook. He flipped through slowly, nodding as his pen tapped against the desk in rhythm. "This," he said, "is the backbone of our case. Not just feelings, not just words. This is evidence, and courts love evidence." Charlene leaned back, the faint hum of his office heater filling the silence. For the first time in weeks, she felt steady. Not safe, not yet, but steady. The illusion lasted until the phone rang. The voice on the other end was cheerful, too cheerful. "Hi, Mrs. Dobbs. This is Social Services at County Hospital. We just wanted to confirm your neurology appointment for next week." Charlene froze. "My what?" The woman read off the details. Date, time, specialist name. Charlene's grip on the phone tightened. "I never scheduled that." The line clicked silent for a beat. Then the woman spoke again, confusion in her tone. "It says here it was booked by a family member." Charlene's breath caught. Another hand was still reaching into her life, tugging the strings. And this time, she hadn't even known the puppet show was happening. Charlene sat at her kitchen table, the cordless phone pressed to her ear. The clock ticked steady on the wall, its second hand stabbing at her nerves. She had called to confirm the neurology appointment that the hospital social worker insisted was on her chart. The receptionist's voice came back, clipped and apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Dobbs, but that appointment was canceled." Charlene blinked. Canceled. By who? The woman hesitated. The sound of fingers tapping a keyboard filled the silence. Then it says here, canceled by family member. Charlene's grip tightened until her knuckles ached. I never canceled anything. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the realization that her life was being rewritten without her. A stranger had rearranged her medical future, and they'd done it in her name. Later that afternoon, an envelope slid under her door, heavy with hospital letterhead. Inside was a written confirmation. Your neurology appointment has been canceled per request of family member. Please call to reschedule if needed. The words blurred as she read them twice, then a third time, her pulse hammering. Brie's fingerprints were all over this. Zach arrived within the hour. She thrust the paper toward him, her breath uneven. They're cutting me off from my own doctors. He scanned it, lips pressed thin. This isn't just neglect anymore. This is interference. Medical interference. That's a whole new layer. He flipped open his folder, adding the letter to the growing stack of evidence. The court will see a pattern here. Ignored calls, stolen meds, fraudulent filings, and now sabotaged treatment. Loretta, perched on the couch with her arms crossed, muttered, "She's building a cage around you, Charlene, one locked with paperwork instead of bars." Charlene swallowed, her mouth dry. "Then let's tear the cage down." The next morning, Loretta took it upon herself to dig deeper. She rifled through the pile of mail on Charlene's counter, magazines, bills, circulars, and froze when she found a stack of unopened hospital envelopes at the bottom. Inside were appointment reminders for specialists Charlene never even knew she'd been referred to: cardiology, ophthalmology, even a follow-up endocrinology session. Buried under the pizza coupons, Loretta said, shaking her head. "She's been intercepting your mail too. Didn't even bother to shred it." Charlene felt her chest tighten, the betrayal sinking heavier than ever. Her health wasn't being ignored. It was being manipulated, hidden, erased piece by piece. Officer Kelly arrived that evening, her presence like a steel blade cutting through the tension. She sat across from Charlene, notebook open, and listened without interruption. Then she stood, adjusting her jacket. "I'll speak with Brie myself." 2 days later, Kelly returned, her face taut. She dropped her notes on the table. "She claims you're fading, Mrs. Dobbs. Said you're confused, forgetting things, inventing stories." Charlene's eyes burned hot. "She's setting me up to look incompetent." "Yes," Kelly replied, her voice flat with controlled fury, "which is why I'll be attaching my own report to counter hers. You're lucid, you're consistent, and you keep better records than most court clerks I've worked with." Charlene closed her eyes, relief battling dread. Brie wasn't just dismissing her anymore, she was laying groundwork for something bigger. That night, as Charlene sorted through another pile of mail, her hand stilled on a thick, official-looking envelope, stamped with the county courthouse seal. Her breath caught. She tore it open with shaking fingers, the paper slicing unevenly under her grip. Her eyes scanned the words, heart pounding louder with each line. Petition for conservatorship. Petitioners Brandon Dobbs and Brie Dobbs. Her knees weakened. They weren't just sabotaging her appointments, they were coming for her autonomy, for her life. And the next battle wouldn't be fought in the quiet of her kitchen, it would be fought in court. Charlene held the conservatorship petition in both hands, the paper heavy as stone. Every word screamed theft, not of money this time, but of her very autonomy. They wanted to sign her life away under the guise of protection. She folded the petition in half, then in quarters, before dropping it onto Zach's desk. "I'm not fading," she said, her voice clear. "And I'll prove it." Zach didn't smile, but the glint in his eyes said he agreed. He stacked her carefully, kept records, glucose logs, phone calls, pharmacy receipts, into a binder thick enough to slam. "Then we'll block this before it ever reaches a gavel." By Monday, Zach had filed a motion with the court. He attached her notarized affidavit, her hospital records, and every time-stamped call. The paperwork was precise, damning and impossible to dismiss. "Paper beats rumor every time," he told her as they left the clerk's office, the sound of his dress shoes sharp against the courthouse marble. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation to settle the question once and for all. Charlene sat in the exam room, the faint scent of coffee and antiseptic filling the air. The evaluator, a calm woman with horn-rimmed glasses, asked about her finances, her daily routine, her medical regimen. Who handles your prescriptions? I do, Charlene answered without hesitation. And when someone tries to take them, I keep receipts. Do you understand the nature of your case? Charlene leaned forward. I understand they're trying to erase me before I'm gone. The evaluator's pen stilled. Then she gave a small nod. When the report came back, it read in bold, patient demonstrates full lucidity and decision-making capacity. In court, the findings hit harder than a hammer. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the evaluation before looking squarely at Brandon and Brie. His voice echoed through the small chamber. This emergency petition is denied. The evidence suggests not incompetence, but malicious intent. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, eyes dropping to the table. Brie's jaw clenched so tight her lips nearly disappeared. Beside Charlene, Loretta squeezed her hand so hard the bones creaked. Zach stood tall, sliding the binder back into his briefcase. Motion denied, he murmured with satisfaction. Outside the courtroom, Officer Kelly intercepted them, her uniform crisp, her tone cutting. With this ruling, I'm adding fraud charges to the case. They're not just negligent, they're manipulative. And manipulation leaves a trail. Charlene exhaled, steady but not relieved. They won't stop here. Kelly nodded. Then neither will we. That night, Loretta relayed what she'd overheard at the grocery store. Brie had been whispering in the detergent aisle. Unaware, Loretta stood only 2 rows away. She wants a war. Brie hissed to someone over the phone. We'll give her something to remember. Loretta repeated the words, her voice low but sharp as she set a grocery sack on Charlene's counter. She's not hiding it anymore. Charlene poured herself a glass of water, the ice cubes clinking against the rim. She stared at the condensation, sliding down the glass. A war meant casualties, but she was done being the one laid out on the field. Then I'll fight her on paper. Not whispers, Charlene said. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to a fresh page and began drafting a civil suit. With Zach's help, she also filed for a public record disclosure, so anyone who searched her name would see the truth of her case. The silence of the kitchen was broken only by the pen scratching across paper. For every attempt they made to write her off, she'd write back, louder. 2 nights later, her phone buzzed while she folded laundry. A text from Loretta lit the screen. At urgent care, just saw Brie walk in. You won't believe this. Charlene froze, socks clenched in her hands, heart thudding like a drum. Brie at urgent care. The tables might be turning. Charlene was folding towels when Loretta's text came through. Urgent care. Brie just walked in. Looks rattled. Her pulse quickened. She sat down hard on the edge of the couch, the towel limp in her lap. Brie, the woman who left her shaking on the bathroom floor, the woman who siphoned her insurance and whispered about conservatorship, was now the patient. Loretta called minutes later, her voice hushed but buzzing with energy. Chest pain, they said. Mild panic attack, most likely. She's being transferred to county ER. Charlene didn't answer right away. The irony was almost too sharp to swallow. She pictured herself in that ambulance weeks ago, fighting for breath, ignored by the very person now strapped to a gurney. Charlene, Loretta pressed. This is your chance. It took her a moment to find her voice. Then let's make it count. Zach was at her door within the hour, papers already in hand. I've got the civil suit ready, he said, sliding the documents across her table. His tone was clipped, efficient, but there was something else underneath. Satisfaction. All I need is the right moment to serve her. Charlene smoothed the pages with steady fingers. Her name at the top, her grievances listed point by point. Neglect, fraud, interference, exploitation. Words that had been her private torment now had the weight of law behind them. Loretta leaned forward. She'll be sitting in that ER, probably in one of those thin gowns, waiting for someone to rescue her. Perfect moment to remind her who she left to rot. Charlene's chest tightened. The thought wasn't sweet. It was heavy, electric. A reversal so sharp it felt unreal. Zach didn't hesitate. I'll file an emergency request with the court. If the judge approves, we serve her at the hospital. He checked his watch. With any luck tonight. The clock seemed to tick faster as the evening stretched. At 9 o'clock, Zach's phone buzzed with a notification. He read it once, then looked up at Charlene. Approved Officer Kelly is en route.
Ooh.
At County ER, fluorescent lights buzzed and antiseptic stung the air. Here, Cruz. Offistalas buzzed, and antiseptic stung the air. The waiting room smelled faintly burnt coffee from the vending machine. Behind the admitting desk, nurses shuffled clipboards. Officer Kelly strode in, her uniform commanding, her expression unreadable. Delivery for Brie Dobbs, she said, sliding the sealed envelope onto the counter. The clerk glanced at the name, then nodded toward the back. Inside, Brie sat in a curtained bay, pale and restless in a thin hospital gown. Her phone sat idle on the tray beside her. She tapped her nails against the plastic, a nervous rhythm. The nurse entered first, placing the envelope on her lap. You've been served. Brie's eyes flicked down, confusion melting into shock. She ripped the seal open, scanning the words: civil suit, financial exploitation, elder neglect, fraud. Her face drained of color, her jaw working soundlessly as the reality settled. Charlene didn't need to see it happen. Loretta painted the picture over the phone, voice almost gleeful, served like a cold plate of justice, right there in the gown. She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Moments later, Charlene's phone rang again. This time Brandon. His voice exploded through the speaker, raw and furious. What the hell have you done? Charlene let the silence stretch. She could almost hear his ragged breathing, the desperation hiding beneath the rage. Then she did what she had practiced in her mind 100 times. She pressed the button and blocked his number. The click was louder than any slam of a door. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling, the quiet of her house wrapping around her like armor. For the first time she felt the balance tip. But before she could rest in that victory, another call came in. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, until the voicemail transcribed across her screen. This is Channel 6 News. We'd like to discuss an elder neglect story we're investigating, and your name came up. Charlene's heart thudded. Her battle was no longer private. Now the whole city was about to hear her story. The reporter's voice was gentle, but the microphone on the table felt like a weapon. Charlene sat stiff-backed in her recliner, Loretta perched protectively on the armrest, arms folded tight. The young woman from Channel 6 adjusted her recorder and offered a soft smile. We'll keep your name anonymous, she promised. But we need the details. Start with the call no one answered. Charlene hesitated, her throat dry, the memory pulling her back to the bathroom tile. She spoke slowly, describing the dizziness, the unanswered rings, the text that went ignored until hours later. The reporter's pen moved furiously across the page. And they were your listed emergency contacts. Yes, Charlene whispered. They knew, they just didn't come. By the time the interview ended, the reporter's eyes carried a quiet fury. This isn't just a personal story, she said, packing up her bag. This is a community story. 2 days later, the piece went live, left on read, The Price of Elder Silence. The article spread like wildfire. On Facebook, strangers commented by the hundreds. This could have been my mother. My aunt went through the same thing. Twitter threads piled on with outrage, tagging the hospital, the city council, even state representatives. Charlene scrolled through the messages in disbelief. For years she'd been invisible, dismissed as dramatic or paranoid. Now her story was pinned and shared, her words echoing in places she'd never stepped foot. Loretta cackled when she saw one comment. Brie and Brandon Dobbs should be ashamed. Lexington isn't that big. People know. Guess they're famous now, Loretta said, pouring sweet tea into 2 glasses. But not for the reasons they wanted. The fallout hit fast. Zach called late one evening, his voice edged with triumph. Two firms reached out today offering pro bono support. They read the article and want in. You've got a legal army forming. Charlene set down her tea, her hands trembling. People actually believe me. Not just believe you. Zach corrected. They want to fight beside you. Meanwhile, Brandon's employer began asking questions. His HR department called Zach directly, requesting documents to confirm whether the dependent filings were legitimate. Within a week, an internal inquiry had opened. At Brie's workplace, the ripple hit harder. Her clinic placed her on administrative leave pending review. The official wording was sterile, but the message was clear. Her spotless, curated image had cracked. Loretta relished the irony. All those Instagram posts about self-care, and now she's taking forced time off for fraud investigations. But the sharpest twist came from the community itself. Charlene opened her mailbox to find envelopes, cards with shaky handwriting, notes of encouragement, even checks for $10 and $20 tucked inside. One read, "For your hospital bills. Don't let them take your dignity." Another, "My mama went through this too. Fight for her, and for us." The stack grew daily, small donations from strangers who had been touched by her story. Charlene laid the envelopes on her kitchen table, overwhelmed. "I've never had this kind of support." Loretta squeezed her hand. "You deserve every penny. And more." The night air was cool when Officer Kelly stopped by. She carried her uniform cap in one hand, fatigue shadowing her eyes, but her voice carried steady authority. "Mrs. Dobbs," she said, sliding into a chair, "the investigation has reached the district attorney's office. They're reviewing the charges." Charlene's pulse raced. She searched the officer's face. "So it's real now?" Kelly nodded. "Financial exploitation, fraud, medical neglect. It's no longer in limbo. It's moving forward." Charlene leaned back, staring at the kitchen ceiling, as if it might hold answers. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. For the first time, her fight wasn't just paperwork stacked in folders or whispers traded in hallways, it was official. "They thought silence would bury me," Charlene said softly. "Instead, it brought me here." Kelly's jaw tightened. "And now it'll bring them to court." The district attorney's office smelled faintly of stale coffee and floor polish, but to Charlene it might as well have been the scent of justice. She sat beside Zach in the waiting area, her folder of records balanced neatly in her lap. She had gone over them so many times she knew the sequence by heart, but still, her fingers traced the tabs as though smoothing them could steady her nerves. When the DA stepped out, a tall woman in a dark suit with sharp eyes, Charlene held her breath. The prosecutor flipped through the file. Zach handed her, nodding at each page. Then she looked up. "We'll be moving forward with charges," she said simply. "Financial exploitation, medical neglect, fraud." Charlene exhaled, the words vibrating through her chest. 3 counts, 3 acknowledgments that she had not been invisible, not paranoid, not dramatic. She had been right. Zach adjusted his tie, his voice crisp. "We'll also be filing for full restitution, damages and compensation for her medical costs. Every cent they've siphoned, we'll claw back." Charlene glanced at him, surprised by the heat in his words, but his eyes were steady, almost protective. 2 days later, a message came through Zach's office. Brie wanted to settle quietly. A meeting, no press, no filings, just a resolution. Charlene sat at Zach's desk, the leather cool under her palms. "She wants to pay me off," she said slowly. Zach's mouth twitched, more smirk than smile. "She wants to buy silence. You don't owe her that." Charlene thought of the bathroom floor, the unanswered calls, the pharmacy slip signed by someone else's hand. Her decision was instant. No settlement. That evening, Loretta marched into Charlene's kitchen with a yellow legal pad and a sharpened pencil. "If you're going to testify," she said, slapping the pad down, "you're going to do it polished. Let's practice." For 2 hours, Charlene rehearsed. She stood in her living room, answering Loretta's mock questions, What did you feel when you called Brie and no one answered? Her voice shook at first. I felt, she paused, steadied herself. I felt like I didn't matter, like I could vanish, and it wouldn't change their evening. Again and again she practiced. Loretta corrected her posture, reminded her not to apologize for telling the truth. By the end, Charlene's answers came smooth, her words precise, her tone steady as stone. You'll be calm, Loretta said proudly. You'll be clear, and they'll have nothing to poke holes in. When Zach dropped by later with updates, he leaned against the counter, flipping through motions. We've filed to garnish wages pending outcome, he said casually, though his eyes glittered. If we win, they won't have a paycheck untouched until you're compensated. Charlene tightened her grip around her teacup. She imagined Brie opening a pay stub, the deductions slicing into her vanity purchases. For once, every missing dollar would be one stolen from Brie's reflection, not her own survival. Still, the anxiety gnawed at the edges. One night, Charlene woke from a restless dream and sat at her desk, staring at her timeline. The hum of the fridge filled the silence. She didn't doubt her evidence, but the weight of family betrayal pressed hard. She had raised Brandon with everything she had. How had it come to this? Morning brought an answer she hadn't expected. A court clerk's envelope slid under her door, its edges bent from the mail slot. Charlene tore it open, the legal paper thick between her fingers. She read once, then again, her pulse quickening. Her court date had been set. Her eyes widened at the location typed in bold, County ER Courthouse Annex, the very place Brie had once been served in a hospital gown. Charlene's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. Fate, it seemed, had a flair for symmetry. The same halls where Brie had ignored her suffering would now echo with judgment. The courthouse annex smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper, a mix of hospital and courtroom in one. Charlene's shoes clicked softly against the tile as she entered, Loretta at her side like a bodyguard in pearls. Every step toward the witness stand felt heavier, but she didn't falter. When she sat down, the Bible was placed in her palm. Its cover was smooth from decades of hands, and her voice did not shake when she swore to tell the truth. She had already told it in silence for too long. Zach rose first. His presence was calm but edged with steel. He handed Charlene her neatly organized binder and nodded. Mrs. Dobbs, please walk the court through what happened the night you collapsed. The courtroom hushed. Charlene spoke steadily, recounting the bathroom floor, the unanswered calls, the 3-hour late text. She flipped to her logbook, her handwriting precise, the ink dark against the white paper. These are the times I called Brie and Brandon, she explained. Each one unanswered. Screens lit up as Zach submitted the call transcripts. Every ring, every silence, preserved by technology that did not lie. Next came the pharmacy footage. The grainy video filled the courtroom monitor. Brie in sunglasses, signing Charlene's prescription slip with one hand while scrolling her phone with the other. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. And here, Charlene continued, pointing to a photocopy, is the Walgreens record showing my discount card applied to antibiotics I never needed. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, leaned forward. Mrs. Dobbs, your documentation is remarkable. Very few cases arrive this well prepared. Charlene bowed her head slightly. When no one believes you, Judge, you learn to keep receipts. Brie's attorney shifted uncomfortably before standing. His voice was smooth, but thin. Mrs. Dobbs, isn't it possible you misunderstood? Perhaps your family acted out of confusion, or even care. Emotions can cloud memory. Charlene's lips pressed into a line. She turned a page in her binder and slid the paper forward. Then perhaps this text will clear the cloud. Zach stood, taking the sheet. He read aloud, his voice echoing, if you go through with this, don't expect help when the next episode hits. The words lingered, acidic, impossible to misinterpret. Brie shifted in her seat, face flushing red. Care. Charlene repeated, her voice cool. That is not care. The attorney tried to redirect, but the air in the courtroom had shifted. His defense wilted under the weight of Charlene's record. Then Zach turned to Brandon. "Mr. Dobbs, do you dispute your mother's claims?" Brandon fidgeted in his seat, sweat gathering at his collar. He glanced once at Brie, then lowered his eyes. His voice was small, almost boyish. "I just didn't want to cause waves." The words landed with a hollow thud. Not protection, not defense, cowardice. Charlene inhaled, steadying herself. Then she looked directly at the judge, her voice clear and unshakable. "If they won't respond to illness, they will respond to court." The room held its breath. The judge leaned back, tapping his gavel lightly against the bench. "We've heard enough for today. This court is in recess. Final ruling will be delivered tomorrow." Loretta reached over and squeezed Charlene's hand. Zach gave a single nod, his jaw tight. Brie stared straight ahead, frozen, while Brandon slumped in his chair like a man already sentenced. Charlene gathered her binder, the pages now heavier with meaning than paper should allow. As she stood, the judge's words echoed in her ears. Final ruling tomorrow. Tomorrow, the word rang like a promise and a warning. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had finally evened. The courtroom was hushed, as if every breath had been pinned against the walls. Charlene sat at the plaintiff's table, her binder in front of her, Loretta a solid presence in the row behind. Zach leaned slightly forward, his hands folded neatly on the desk, eyes locked on the judge. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. "This court has reviewed the evidence, testimony, and corroborating documents," the judge began, his voice heavy with authority. "We find sufficient grounds for judgment." Charlene's chest tightened. She gripped the edges of her binder so hard the plastic creaked. The judge adjusted his glasses. "In the matter of financial exploitation, medical neglect, and fraudulent activity, damages are awarded in full to Mrs. Charlene Dobbs. All court costs will be paid by the defendants." The words washed over her like a bell toll. Full damages. Court costs. Every ignored call, every dismissed plea. It all had weight now. The judge continued. "Additionally, a permanent restraining order is issued. The defendants shall have no contact with Mrs. Dobbs in person, by phone, or through third parties. Any violation will result in immediate penalty." Charlene's breath hitched. Permanent. The word rang like steel. Brie's face went chalk white. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering furiously, but the man only shook his head. The judge's gaze hardened. "Brie Dobbs, you are convicted of misdemeanor fraud and medical neglect. You will complete community service, pay restitution, and face probation under county supervision." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Brie sat rigid, her manicured hands clenching into fists on her lap. The judge turned to Brandon, who avoided his mother's eyes. "As for Brandon Dobbs, this court orders repayment of all insurance premiums claimed fraudulently under your employer's plan. Your actions demonstrate negligence in oversight and complicity in fraud." Brandon's head dropped lower, his shoulders folding inward like a man caving under his own weight. Finally, the judge's voice softened as he looked toward Charlene. "This court affirms your full legal independence and financial protection under Kentucky elder law. You are recognized as competent, lucid, and capable of managing your affairs without interference." Charlene blinked back tears. For months, she had fought not just neglect, but the creeping narrative that she was invisible, incompetent, fading, and here, in the sterile walls of a courtroom, her independence had been stamped official. The gavel struck again. "This matter is closed." Silence lingered a beat too long, then Loretta clapped once, loud and proud. It broke the tension like thunder. A few others in the gallery followed, their applause cautious but genuine. Charlene's heart swelled, not with triumph, but with a deep, quiet relief. She had not only survived, she had been heard. Outside the courthouse, Officer Kelly met her with a rare smile, the lines around her eyes softening. "You rewrote the rules for people like you," she said. "Elders who've been ignored, dismissed, forgotten. Now there's a precedent. You didn't just win, you set the stage for others." Charlene's throat tightened. "I just wanted them to stop." Kelly shook her head. "You did more than stop them. You lit a fire. Later, back in Zach's office, he slid a small box across the desk. Something I had made for you. Charlene lifted the lid. Inside sat a walnut plaque, polished and gleaming. The words engraved red, served with authority. Her fingers traced the letters, her eyes glistening. You didn't have to. Zach gave a rare smile. Yes, I did. You've become my toughest client, and my proudest. Loretta, standing at the door, sniffled and fanned her face with a tissue. Well, look at you, from bathroom floor to courthouse victory lap. Charlene laughed softly, the sound fragile but real. That evening, she sat on her porch with Loretta, the cicadas buzzing in the humid Kentucky air. The sky stretched orange and purple, the scent of honeysuckle drifting from the fence line. For the first time in months, Charlene let herself breathe without weight pressing down. Her phone buzzed against the porch rail. A new email. She opened it, squinting at the letterhead. Lexington County Hospital Ethics Board invites you to speak at our annual seminar on patient protection and elder advocacy. We believe your testimony can guide systemic change. Charlene's eyes widened. Her fight had begun in silence, but now the very institution where she'd once been wheeled in, invisible and ignored, wanted her voice at the podium. She turned the screen toward Loretta, who let out a low whistle. Sugar, she said, you're about to take this fight public. Charlene leaned back in her chair, the glow of the setting sun warming her face. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin. The hospital auditorium was filled to the last chair. Doctors in white coats, nurses in scrubs, administrators with clipboards, all watching Charlene as she stepped up to the podium. The microphone crackled, amplifying the sound of her steady breath. I called for help, she began, her voice firm, and the silence almost killed me. My family ignored me, but strangers, paramedics, neighbors, officers, answered, that's why I'm standing here. She spoke plainly, recounting the unanswered calls, the stolen prescriptions, and the humiliation of her own son filing for conservatorship. She didn't embellish. Her notes and her lived truth did the work. When she finished, the applause was instant and thunderous. People rose to their feet, clapping until the sound filled every corner of the room. Charlene's eyes stung, not from weakness, but from a lifetime of invisibility, finally breaking. 2 weeks later, she returned to the hospital for routine blood work. On her way out, she stopped in the corridor and froze. Framed on the wall, beneath the words Elder Protection Wing, hung her own photograph. A plaque read, Charlene Dobbs, Advocate, Survivor, Voice for the Forgotten. Her breath caught. She wasn't invisible anymore. Loretta insisted on celebrating. She threw a small dinner in her living room, the table crowded with fried chicken, green beans, and peach cobbler. Neighbors squeezed in, clinking glasses of sweet tea. To Charlene, Loretta declared, proof you can't bury the truth, or my best friend. Laughter warmed the room, but Charlene only smiled quietly, grateful beyond words. Later that evening, Zach dropped by, tie loosened, carrying papers. The state's launching an elder awareness campaign, he said. They want a consultant. I gave them your name. Charlene blinked. Me, why? Because you didn't just survive, Zach said. You forced the system to listen. In the weeks that followed, she began volunteering at the hospital discharge desk. Every Wednesday, she sat by the sliding doors, greeting seniors being wheeled out alone. She offered encouragement, sometimes slipping her number discreetly into their palm. No one leaves unseen, she told Loretta one evening. Meanwhile, Brie's name spread through medical circles for all the wrong reasons. Her conviction flagged her in employment systems, her record following her like a shadow. Positions she once flaunted were suddenly out of reach. Charlene didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Silence was enough. One autumn afternoon, Charlene was stacking brochures when a young nurse approached. Her scrubs were wrinkled, eyes bright with earnestness. Mrs. Dobbs, the nurse asked softly. Charlene looked up. Yes, dear. The nurse hesitated, then pulled a small notebook from her pocket. Would you consider writing it all down? Your story. People like me, We need to know what silence costs. Charlene stilled, the weight of the request sinking deep. Writing it down meant permanence. Legacy. For the first time, she realized her voice could live far beyond the walls of the hospital. Charlene sat at her kitchen table, the same spot where she once clutched a phone in desperation and opened a fresh notebook. The pages smelled faintly of ink and cardboard, untouched, waiting for her voice. She titled it in bold strokes, "Still Breathing, How I Soothed the Silence." Every night for weeks she wrote. Her pen moved across paper with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Steady, insistent, she wrote about the bathroom floor, the unanswered calls, the ambulance lights, the courtroom where she reclaimed her name. The pages filled quickly, grief transforming into testimony, loneliness into proof. When the draft was complete, Zach helped her send it to advocacy blogs. Within days, her words spread. Seniors shared her posts on forums, advocacy networks reposted them, and emails began to arrive. Notes from people who had felt invisible too, thanking her for giving language to their silence. One Saturday morning, as the cicadas buzzed and the sun warmed the porch, Charlene heard a knock. A young woman stood at the door, holding her phone like a lifeline. "Mrs. Dobbs?" she asked, almost shy. Charlene stepped outside, cane tapping lightly against the wooden boards. "Yes, dear?" The woman's eyes brimmed. "I read your story, and last night I drove to my mom's house just to check on her. She was fine, but I wouldn't have gone if not for you." Charlene's throat tightened. She reached out, squeezing the young woman's hand. Then it was worth writing every word. The visitor left with tears and gratitude, and Charlene sank into her porch chair, the weight of the moment pressing softly into her chest. Loretta arrived not long after, carrying 2 glasses of sweet tea that clinked with ice. She eased into the chair beside her, letting out a sigh. "Not dead yet, and already famous." Charlene chuckled, lifting her glass. "Not famous, just heard." The 2 women sat in companionable silence, the wind carrying the smell of honeysuckle from the fence line. It mixed with the faint scent of cut grass, warm and familiar, wrapping the evening in peace. Charlene leaned back, watching the sky streak with gold. For the first time in years, the silence around her didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. The mail came late that day, the carrier's footsteps crunching over the gravel walk. Charlene reached for the envelope resting on top of the stack. Her name was printed clearly across the front. No additions, no forgeries. She tore it open, her fingers trembling, not with fear, but anticipation. Inside was a crisp insurance card, just one name, hers alone. No son, no daughter-in-law, no fraud. She held it up to the fading light. It wasn't just a card. It was proof that her independence was untouchable, that her life was hers again. Loretta leaned over, smiling knowingly. "That's better than any plaque." Charlene smiled, slipping the card into her wallet, where it belonged. She thought back to the woman lying on the cold bathroom floor months ago, unheard, unseen. That woman had been left to fade. But this woman, the one sitting tall on her porch, her story reaching strangers, her name etched in law, had outlived the silence. She set her glass down, her voice soft but firm, carrying into the twilight. "They ignored my call for help. But the world heard what came after.